Chof Av and by the Svadus of Chof Av applies to every place. And as we've seen over the last 24 hours, there's been numerous Farbrengens and Kehilas Anash all over and in Bate Chabad. But obviously the Farbrengen that's happening in the Daled Amis of the Rebbe, which Bechlal Bechsidim, there was always a Indian in going to the Rebbe as much as possible, and especially in their Hashvi'i, took on a new height with the modern technology enables people to travel much more frequently, and especially on the Yom Pagra, and how much more so when it comes to a day personally connected to the Rebbe. We've seen that by older Chassidim and by Shluchim and by Anash, it's always been a focus to be by the Rebbe on a special day, a day connected to the Rebbe such as Chof Av. So the Farbrengen that's happening now by the Ohel is has a special everything that we're accomplishing on Chof Av by the Farbrengen over here in the Rebbe's Daled Amis is obviously on a much more hecheren eifen. So one of the things that we are going to do is lilmeid behaisvadus miterasei, to learn something, a Torah from the Rebbe's father at the Farbrengen. So I'm going to attempt to do that. And as we all know, the Torah of the Rebbe's father is Kabbalah, and there's Gematriyos, and you have to pay attention. But we know that there was something very interesting that I saw. For me, it was a chiddush, even though it's an old thing. But there's an organization called Harav Levi Yitzchak, which is, the Rebbe founded this organization and this movement, which is to make a keilah for those that are retired and have free time, that there should be keilim that give these people stipends that they should sit and learn Torah. And the name is called Keilah Tiferes Kenim Levi Yitzchak, for the Rebbe's father. So throughout the years, the chapter in 770 in New York would have gatherings in 770, and the Rebbe would participate. The senior citizens would get together, and the Rebbe would participate. So in Tavshim Mem Daled, in 1984, there was a gathering in 770, and the organizer and the director of the organization, Rabbi Menachem Gerlitzky, sent in a duch to the Rebbe of the program that will happen at 770. So he starts off. I'm looking at a picture of this duch that he sent into the Rebbe. So he starts off that there's going to be Divrei Psicha at 1:30, the opening remarks, and then there's going to be Chazan Reb Shneur Zalman Sheiche Baumgarten at 1:45. There's going to be songs in the Ginna Yidei Hatamim Avram Sheikh HaKayin Friedman, also known as Avram Fried. And then he goes on, which ends off with the Rebbe, with Mincha, with the Rebbe Shlita, he writes. So on the first thing, was actually the second thing, starts off with Kabbalah Spanim, and the second item on the agenda, on the schedule, was the Divrei Psicha, the opening remarks. The Rebbe wrote next to those words that the opening remarks should be B'dvar Malchus. It should be a Dvar Malchus. What does Dvar Malchus mean? We usually, Man Malki Rabbanan, I'm usually associated with the Sikha of the Rebbe. That's usually what Dvar Malchus is, but the Rebbe says that there should be a Dvar Malchus, Miterasai Shell, and then a sign to the stationery of this organization, which is called Keilah Tiferes Kenim Levi Yitzchak. That there should be a Dvar Malchus from the Torah of Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe circled. And then the Rebbe added 2 or 3 very important words. That this Torah, this Dvar Malchus of the Rebbe's father, that should be chazer by this event, should be Hamuvan Lahanesafim. It should be a Torah from the Rebbe's father that's understood by those that are gathered at this event. And just to point out that the people that were gathered at this event, not necessarily, many of them probably did not have a background in Torah learning in general, especially the deep Torah of the Rebbe's father. But the Rebbe insisted that the Torah that should be chazer should be understood by all that are gathered. So I'm going to attempt to try to do that. So I'm asking everyone, to those that are here and those that are watching via the broadcast, to try to listen for a moment or two. And I'd like to thank Rabbi Pesach Schmerling. I actually took this from something that he translated into English. So it's one level closer to be understood at a public Farbrengen. Okay, so we know that. So here we go. We're going to chazer a Torah of the Rebbe's father. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, a famous line, that ben chamish shanim lemikra. When the child becomes 5 years old, that's when he starts learning Torah. Ben chamish shanim lemikra. So what's the process? How does this happen? How do you start learning at 5 years old? It must be that for the first 5 years, you're learning how to read. How do you learn how to read? The child learns the Aleph base. And as we see, the custom is that children only start reading later on. But from you start teaching the child Aleph base. And through learning Aleph base for 5 years, when he's 5 years old, ben chamesh shanim lemikra, he's ready to start learning. So that's an obvious, that's the way life works, and it makes sense. But in the style of the Rebbe's father, there's nothing that just makes sense up his seichel. There has to be some type of inner reason why this is like that, because we know that Gashmis comes from Ruchnis, is Nishtalsha from Ruchnis, and since it's like that spiritually, that's why physically that's the way it is, that for the first 5 years you have to learn Aleph base. So here's the Torah. You have to start learning the Aleph base for the first 5 years. How do you say a year in Lashon HaKodesh? The word for year is Shana. Shana has the gematria, the 3 letters, Shin, Nun, Hey, have the gematria of 355. So 355. How many years are we talking about? There's 5 years before you start learning. So there's 5 years, there's 5 times the word Shana. What's the gematria? What's 355 times 5? Is 1775. Okay, so we have the 5 years that the child is learning the Aleph base. Shana times 5 is 1775. Now, the Rebbe's father teaches that we see this process in the very Aleph base themselves. Because the Aleph base, what's the gematria of the Aleph base? Not just the Aleph base, but the Mantzapach, the end letters, the Schlossmem and the Langenun and the Langentzadek and the Langepe and the Langechof. If you have the Aleph base with those letters together, what's the gematria? Again, 1775. The same thing as Shana times 5. So we see in the very Aleph base, we have this concept that before Ben Chamesh Shana Lemikra, in order to start learning, you have to have 5 years of learning the Aleph base. So that's a short Torah of the Rebbe's father. To Mekayim the Rebbe's Hira Lilmin Beisvardis B'terasai, but obviously this is just the beginning, and everyone should make a kviyas, either starting today or starting tomorrow, but to start a kviyas and learning the Torah of the Rebbe's father, which is available, and Baruch Hashem over the last 2 years there have been many books and booklets and PowerPoints and different things that are le'ezer l'siyua to learn the Rebbe's Torah. Okay. So we know that the Rebbe would Farbrengen every year from Tafshin Yud, from the beginning, until as long as weekday Farbrengens were going on. So until Tafshin Mem Ches, the Rebbe Farbrengen every single year in Chof Av. So in the beginning, when that started, those Farbrengens were not the same style as the regular Farbrengens. There was always, the Rebbe made a siyum, a hadrin, and the Rebbe connected the Farbrengen to that because it's a minig to make on a Yahrtzeit. And the Rebbe kind of made it that it wasn't a regular Farbrengen. And also in the Levush, usually on Shabbos, the Rebbe wore the silk, the Zaydina Sirtuk. And by the Farbrengen, the weekday Farbrengens as well, the Rebbe would do so. However, on Chof Av, at least in the early years, he didn't. But then later on, the style of Farbrengens became like all Farbrengens, and the Rebbe started wearing a Zaydin Sirtuk by the Farbrengens as well, of Chof Av. So that's a development over the years. But every year there was a Farbrengen. And during these Farbrengens, the Rebbe would usually speak about his father, and very often the Rebbe would share different details about a story or something about the life of his father, and teach us the Hira from this. And once it was in Tafshin Yud Gimel, it was a Shabbos. Chof Av was Shabbos Parshas Eikev. It was on Shabbos. And there was a Yid, Rabbi Diskin, who knew the Rebbe's father. And the Rebbe requested from him by the Farbrengen to talk about the story of the arrest and the exile And he got up and started saying the story. And as he started saying the story, the Rebbe started crying. And the more he spoke and spoke about the terrible tragedy of the arrest and the persecution of the Rebbe's father, the Rebbe cried more. And according to one of the accounts, some people tried to tell him to go down, because as he spoke, the Rebbe cried more and more. So we have with us Rabbi Elkanah Shmotkin, who's the director of GEM, which is a maisid which is important to all of us Chassidim and very dear to us, as it gives us a lifeline in our iskashros to the Rebbe, and obviously no need to elaborate on that. And one of the many projects that GEM has undertaken in the last, I don't know the exact number, I think 15 years or more, is and spent thousands of hours and manpower and dollars to accomplish, was to research the Teildos of the Rebbe. And we have payers from this. We have some clip which we saw before, the earliest documentary series and the earliest book, Volume 1, and we're hoping this will be Volume 2 very soon. And this has all been done. So Rabbi Shmotkin has become a sort of, so to speak, an expert in the Teildos of the Rebbe, and by extension, the Teildos of the Rebbe's father. So we'd like to ask Rabbi Elkanah Shmotkin to share with the Olam some of the stories or Teildos of the Baal HaYilula.
Shkoyach Yossi. Chaim. So I guess in your introduction you were trying to say politely, as ich bin geworden a historian, Chas v'sholem, it's a Farbrengen. We'll try and share a few stories of the Rebbe's father, but and that's what I was hired for tonight, to share a few stories of the Rebbe's father. But just betur akdama, you know, there's the Yud Aleph Nisan Sichos, where the Rebbe begins the Farbrengen, or begins one of the Sichos, with this thing that makes all of us uncomfortable, and that is when the Rebbe is saying how uncomfortable he is, that l'chayre das aninim prati, and then he goes on to explain, ich weiß, whatever it is. Usually it's that when Yidden kommen zusammen, das aninim klali, and befrat, we'll chazer in yanim in Teire, and we'll make achlatis, so it's okay that we're having a Farbrengen. It's a lashon that I know many of us are very uncomfortable even hearing the Rebbe speak that way, as though he's apologizing for that there's a Farbrengen, Yud Aleph Nisan. And there's a very similar lashon that you see sometimes on Vav Tishrei and on Chof Av. So just like we know that Yud Aleph Nisan is Chag HaChagim, and for us it's the biggest Yom Tov that there is, somewhere up there above, or whatever it is, Yotes Kislev V'chulu. The same thing with Chof Av. I mean, the Rebbe himself kind of puts it together that these days are similar, the same type of thing, that he's telling us it's a Yom Prati of his. And B'derech Memela, I would like to think that for Chassidim and Mekusharim, these days are the most meaningful days, and the days that we need to think about and to appreciate and to really live during these days more than any other days that there are, because they're days that are specifically connected to the Rebbe very personally. Anyway, so we'll share a few stories as much as there's time for. And yeah, the Rebbe, we'll share a little bit about the Rebbe's father, and depending on how much time we have, we will either expand or compress. The Rebbe's father was born in a small city called Podebranka in Russia, and his mother, Rebbe Zelda Rachel, was the daughter of the Rav of the city, whose name is Reb Zalman Chaikin. I keep making this mistake. I'm sorry. His uncle was the Rav of the city. His name was Reb Yoel Chaikin, and he was also his Melamed. His Zayda was a Gvir in the city, Reb Zalman Chaikin. And just to give you a bit of a picture of who he was, because the Rebbe's father obviously grew up kind of under him, in his shadow, in his home to a certain extent. It's a short story that's told about him, and that is that he was, as a Gvir, he had a big home, and it was a very open home. And Aniyim would be able to come in, and they would eat, and they would be able to sleep there if they wanted. People stayed for weeks, people stayed for months, as long as they wanted, basically. And the way it worked was that the senior ani would become the kitchen manager. Whoever had seniority and it was there for longest, he would take care of the kitchen. So one ani moved on, and the next one took his place and became the manager of the kitchen, and he made some rules. First of all, there are certain set times for the meals. Second of all, we don't use the back door. We only come in the front doors. The rules were posted, that all the aniyim knew. One day, Reb Zalman came home, and he walked in the back door. So this fellow started screaming at him, "What are you doing? Don't you know there are rules here? You have to come in the front door. I'm in charge over here." Obviously, he didn't know that he was the owner of the home, and Reb Zalman apologized and walked in the front door. So, the same way that Rebbe Tzimchana speaks about her father, whom the Rebbe grew up under and almost in his home, and that obviously had a tremendous hashpah on the Rebbe as a child. When we go up one generation, we hear about the Rebbe's father. I think this is an interesting story that kind of tells us what he grew up amidst. And it was his uncle, Rabbi Yoel, who was his main melamed as a child. After the istalkus of the Rebbe's father, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a 2-page obituary in Kovetz Lubavitch. At the time, nobody knew that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote it, but the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the whole thing. And one of the things that he writes there, it's Yiddish, it's very, very interesting, like what he chooses to highlight and how he speaks about the Rebbe's father. Never mind, the way he starts it is he says that just a couple days ago, it was Noida to Chasna de Benesia, Harav, the Rebbe's name, that his father was nostalgic, the terrible news that his father was nostalgic in Kazakhstan. It's just interesting that the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing how was Noida to Chasna de Benesia, the Rebbe, about the istalkus of his father. But anyway, one of the things that he writes there, like kind of early on in his life, that from very early on, it was known to everybody about his kishroinis iluyim yotzim min haklal. Well, one of the big highlights that we always see about him, and that's always spoken about, and that the Rebbe himself was madgish quite a few times, was the fact that he was a tremendous mekusher to the Rebbe Rashab. And there was something written in English in Tafshin Nun. Was it in LNS? Yiddishaim, that's right. It was in the Yiddishaim. There's an article about the Rebbe's father, and it says there, he was also active in many areas involving the Jewish community, including participating in meetings called by the Lubavitch Rebbe of that day. The Rebbe Rashab, with whom Harav Levi Yitzchak had very close ties. So the Rebbe crosses out the word, it says he was also active. The Rebbe crosses out the word also and writes very. He was very active. And when it says the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe adds, Rebbe Rashab nishmas eidin Harav Levi Yitzchak haya chasidoi hachi masur. He was the most ibergegeben chassid of the Rebbe Rashab. And then when it says he had very close ties, the Rebbe adds the words personal ties. He had very close personal ties. So also another interesting point there that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, which you see in a number of places. I think it's in the Toldos, in the beginning of Hayom also, that he writes that from Taf Reish Samach Beis he was mishtatif in every meeting of the Rebbe Rashab for Inyane Aklal. Taf Reish Samach. It's just a diuk that I would think is kind of every time you see it, it's like, okay, that's an interesting little point to throw in here. From Tafresh Samach Beis, he was Meshatev in every single meeting that he had. Tafresh Samach Beis is the year of the Rebbe's birth. So to me, it seems that there's some type of connection over there. Anyway, moving forward a little bit, for the Rebbe Rashab made the shidduch between the Rebbe's father and Rebbe Tzimchana, the Rebbe's mother. And for a number of years after the Chasana, he was writing, he was Pashat sitting and learning, and he was writing his Torah. We'll fast forward a little bit to the Rebbe's birth. So I just called David Dubov a few minutes ago, right before I started, to make sure we got the details right, and I have some corrections to the way I've told it a couple times the last couple days. Taf Reish Samaches. The Rebbe was 6 years old. Rabbi Yitzchok Dubov, who was a Bochur in Lubavitch, came to visit Nikolaev together with his friend Reb Shmuel Grossman. And together, since they were coming from the Rebbe Rashab, they were coming from the Rebbe, they decided to pay a visit to his tremendous Mekusher and Chassid, Reb Levi Yitzchok. So Reb Shmuel, Reb Asher Grossman, and Reb Yitzchok Dubov came to the Rebbe's home. The Rebbe was 6 years old at the time, and they saw that the Rebbe's father is sitting on a chair, and there are two boys sitting in front of him on the grass, listening. So he figured he's probably reading him a story or something. He comes closer, and he sees that he's reading them Likutei Torah. So the Bochurim wouldn't necessarily have the chutzpah to ask, but Reb Asher, who was an older chassid, he said to him, like, what are you doing exactly? So he said, "Ze verstehen. Du kannst ze verhören." And that's what he did. He asked the Rebbe to repeat to him what it was, and the Rebbe chazed the whole Amud in Likutei Torah. The Rebbe says in a couple of different places that his father was his main teacher. I just noticed yesterday an interesting fact that's written in the Yiddish Heim, which most of the information for those articles about the Rebbe's early life came directly from Rebbe Tzimchana. He says that the Rebbe's father would sit a whole night, Friday night, and learn with the Rebbe. Stam. Yossi was saying before about, that the Rebbe's father's Torah is Kabbalah. It's a little bit over our heads, v'chulu. So I'm certainly not a Makubal, Kama researcher and Kama chassid, but I should tell you that I think that when you open up Likutei Levi Yitzchok, even though it's a little bit intimidating the way the pages go straight, page after page after page, it actually can be understood, befrat with the way recently Rabbi David Dubov, Pesach Schmerling, and others have really worked to be mefaneach it, to add nekudis, to simplify it. It actually is, it is understandable to us. And the way David says it, and I can't agree more, it's a tremendous, the way the Rebbe said it on a number of occasions. The Rebbe himself spoke about his father's Torah all the time to us at Farbrengens. It is understandable, and l'chayra, it's a tremendous nachas to the Rebbe when we take the time and learn his father's Torah. Fast forward to when he became the Rav. So for quite a while, the Rebbe Rashab was pushing that he should become the Rav in a number of cities. First was Rostov, then another city. Those didn't work out exactly. And then eventually became the Rav in Dnepropetrovsk. Dnepropetrovsk was actually a very large city, a big city, and it was his first shtel. He had never been a Rav before. He was sitting at home and learning. And the Rebbe Rashab pushed and pushed that he should be there. It wasn't a simple thing. There was opposition to him. There were obviously some chassidim in the city, and they wanted him to be the Rav, but there was opposition to him as well. And just two little things that happened. So there, in the end, they made up that there would be two Rabbanim, and he became the Rav of Dnepropetrovsk along with somebody else, a Veltische Rav as well. And Rebbe Tzimchana writes how there was opposition in the beginning, but then after a short time, everybody in the city fell in love with him. And the time that she says where it was most seen, the transformation that happened, when they arrived in the city, the Rebbe was 6.5 years old. But the transformation was complete, the way the Rebbetzin writes it, Rebbe Tzimchana writes it, by the Rebbe's bar mitzvah. When the entire community and all of the shulin and all the different people came, she writes in great detail about the Rebbe's bar mitzvah, but she writes that was the turning point at which it was clear to all how beloved he had become, how he cared for everybody, begashmias and beruchnias, and even though he was incredibly frum and stubborn with his frumkeit, everybody absolutely loved him. I should say, I'm not going for the basic things that certainly every chassid knows, what Rebbe Tzimchana writes in her Shimis. This is Chassidus 101, the stories of the Rebbe's childhood, of the Rebbe's father's life. This is like basic stuff. Never mind, it's fascinating, so it's easy reading. But I'm sure everybody here knows this. If you don't, please go read it. It's translated beautifully into English as well. There's many other sources. The New Toldos Levi Yitzchok for Hebrew readers, 3 volumes, absolutely fascinating. We need to, at the very least, understand and learn and read about the Rebbe's parents, the Rebbe's father, especially because it's so readily accessible. The Early Years book is not a bad place to learn some of this. There are many videos out with interviews with people. I mean, this is like the basic stuff. I'm just trying to fill in some of the interesting blanks. When did I start? I'll tell. I have. Okay, we'll tell one more story, and then maybe we'll go to after Chof Av, to some of the stories that maybe involve Chof Av after the stalkus of the Rebbe's father. But this one story, people seem to enjoy it, so I will share a story. Okay, one other thing. So I'm going to share two short stories. One is that when the Rebbe was 15 or 16 years old, this story was told by Herschel Nottich's father. His name was... interesting name. Anyway, Herschel Nottich's father told the story. We don't know if it was from him himself or he heard it from somebody, but this is the story that he told. That they were in the Rebbe's father's home. He was a Bochur in Lubavitch. He came together with somebody else, and they were visiting the Rebbe's home in Dnepropetrovsk. And as they were there, the mailman came. And as Bochurim do, they were a little bit nosy, and they were looking, and they saw that the mailman brought a box and handed it to the Rebbe's father. And what do you know? They noticed that the box is from the Rebbe. It's from the Rebbe Rashab. He sent a box to Horav Levi Yitzchok of the Dnepropetrovsk. Interesting. Okay, they saw him go over, and he opened the box, and inside it were some clothing. So the Bochurim started trying to figure out what's going on over here. The Rebbe sent them clothing. So they said, does the Rebbe... it was gifts, obviously. So he said, does the Rebbe send you gifts often? Again, meaning the Rebbe Rashab. So he said, from time to time, he'll send me gifts. And they're like, and do you ever send gifts back to him? So he said, I'll show you my gift to him. And he took them over to the door, and he opened it a crack, and the Rebbe was sitting there and learning. I'll fast forward to a story that happened in Tafresh Tzaddik, 1930. This is fast forwarding all the way through the communist revolution, when the persecution of religion became absolutely unbearable. All the Rabbanim were falling away like flies. Either they ran away, or they were scared away, or they were tortured away. There was nobody he was the only Rav left standing. Obviously in Dnepropetrovsk and pretty much in all of Ukraine, the only one Rav who was able to stand up to the communists. And in 1930, the government ordered that there be a Ve'idas HaRabbanim in Kharkov, a rabbinical conference in Kharkov. And one of the key things that they wanted is that the rabbis should all sign a proclamation stating that the government is very supportive of religion. And that had already been done by 26 or 28 Rabbanim in Belarus. And they were trying to get each of the countries, each of the provinces of the Soviet Union, that they should get a similar proclamation. And the Rebbe's father, in the end, did not sign it. He stood up to them. And in fact, they forced him to go meet the premier, the prime minister of Ukraine, whatever it was called. The prime minister then was all of the entire USSR, but the head of the entire Ukraine tried to convince him, the way they say in the archives, tried to convince him to sign it, and he wouldn't sign it. But as he was there was a group of Bochurim who were learning smicha, hiding in the Weiber shul, where it was dark, in the shul in Kharkov. There was an Elter Bochur there, and he brought... The Rebbe's father was a big Rav who was in the city, brought him to faher them. And he came in, and Reb Nachum Goldschmidt, who was from Dnepropetrovsk, was there. And he, of course, knew the Rebbe's father. He was a classmate of the Rebbe's brother, Label. So the way he says it, Rebbe Levi Yitzchok walked into the room, and the room lit up. He had such a tzir, he had such a presence, he felt like the room lit up. Of course, he jumped up, he recognized him, and long story short, he fahered the Bochurim for a few minutes. They were learning Melicha, and he asked them some shaylas, and before long, he started explaining the entire Indian of Melicha al pi Kabbalah, what Shriya and Hadacha, Melicha and Hadacha, and what it all is al pi Kabbalah, and why the Taz holds like this and the Shach holds like this, because their Sherish and Neshama is this or that. Within 5 minutes, he lost them, and he was going on and on and on, and the Bochurim were sitting there trying to keep up and understand the way he was explaining what they were learning al pi Kabbalah. On the way out, so as he was leaving, Reb Nachum and this Elter Bochur escorted him to his hotel. Reb Nachum because he knew him, and the Elter Bochur because he was the one who had brought him to faher the Bochurim. As they walked him back to the hotel, he started telling them, Bochurim, do you know why I'm here in town? There's a Vidas HaRabbanim, and the Rabbanim and the government wants us to sign this proclamation, and we're not sure. Should we sign it, and maybe because of this they'll become more cooperative to religion, or should we oppose it because they're going to use it against us? He was going back and forth. They walked him up to his room, and he was getting more and more agitated. He sat down by the table, and he put his head in his hands, and he was back and forth. Should he do it? Should he not do it? At a certain point, they said to him, Rebbe, after legt sich zu. They didn't know kind of what to do with themselves. So the Rebbe's father turned to the bed and said, I'm not going to sleep there. I don't know who slept here before. Now, the conference was 1 to 2 weeks. I'm not sure exactly how long. It was between 1 and 2 weeks. And he was staying in that hotel room. So obviously he was not using the bed. And Yesh Lahashves, with the story, when the Rebbe was in Paris in Tafshin Zayin visiting, there were certain Chassidim who would follow him very closely every day, and they visited him in the hotel, and they noticed that the Seforim did not move from the bed, did not move on the bed from day to day. In other words, the Rebbe didn't use the bed in the hotel either. What does this mean? Yeah or no? Okay, I'll tell you a couple stories post Chof Mendel. Just 3 minutes or 3 stories? Okay. I wasn't asked to speak about this, but there's another few stories that are post Chof Av, because there's some people, there are people who are going to help, in their minds, to help the Rebbe be Mekayim the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Em and visiting the Rebbe's father. So I thought it would be appropriate, and obviously that could be for the Farbrengen for later, what this is and what everybody can discuss what they think it means to the Rebbe, what it does certainly mean to the Rebbe, what place it has, v'chulu. But I just want to share a couple of little stories. In summer Tafshin Lamed Aleph, Reb Mordechai Menashe Gerelik was living in Tashkent, and the Rebbe sent a message asking that some of the Chassidim go from Tashkent to Alma-Ata to visit his father. It was an 1.5-hour flight at the time in Russia. And they should bring along with them pictures of the Rebbe. They should say Meine Lashon there and different things that they should do. They went, and before long, most of them were suddenly let out of Russia. That following Tishrei, right after that summer, Tishrei Lamed Beis, some of these Bochurim, including this fellow, Rebbe Gerelik, came to the Rebbe. Erev Yom Kippur was the first time he saw the Rebbe. He went online in the afternoon after the bracha. The Rebbe gave out lekach, and the Rebbe stopped him and asked him who else was there and who else made it here. V'chulu, spoke to him for a couple of minutes, and he used the opportunity to ask the Rebbe for a bracha that people should get out of Russia. And he asked also for his father, and the Rebbe said, well, your father, we still need him to stay there. And obviously that sent a shiver down his back. He wanted his father to get out of Russia. Later he understood. After Sukkot, he had a yichidus with the Rebbe. And he brought to the Rebbe 10 pictures he had taken of the Rebbe's father's Ohel. And the Rebbe took the pictures in the yichidus, and he pulled out a magnifying glass, and he studied every picture for an incredibly long amount of time with the magnifying glass. And then he started asking him questions. How much space is there between the goyim around and where my father's buried? Who's buried to his right? Who's buried to his left? He started asking him all these questions, which he says 90% of them he didn't know the answer. He hadn't paid attention to this. And suddenly the Rebbe turned and he looked out the window, and he said immediately he felt the Rebbe wasn't here anymore. He was suddenly looking out the window, and the Rebbe said to him, "Was hältst du? Wollt man gekannt bringen dem Taten der Herzu? Is there a precedent for this? Would it be kedai to make an international thing out of this between countries, to use diplomacy to try and make this happen?" And he says, like, what's he supposed to answer? He's a Bochur standing there. And the Rebbe was quiet for a long time, and he said, "Zol shem bleiben azoi." David Nachshon, when he went to restore the oilim of the Rabbeim, so the Rebbe gave, he came back, he informed about Nezhin and Hadich and all these places, and the Rebbe gave him a nice, a bracha for each of them. When he came back with the key to the oil in Alma-Ata, immediately Rabbi Groner came running back out and said, the Rebbe wants you to give him the key himself. And he walked into Gan Eden Elyon, the Stuff Shinun Aleph, and he started handing the Rebbe the key, and he said, the Rebbe said, das ist the Schlüssel zum Ohel. And he said, das ist the Rebbe's Taten's Kaver. The Rebbe said again, das ist the Schlüssel zum Ohel. And he said, yeah. And he gave it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe started giving him brachas, pouring brachas on him for what he had done, for taking care of his father's oil. One other thing that I just learned today that was brought to my attention, sorry, in Chof Av, Tafshin Yudalid, the Rebbe speaks about how it says in Achreinim that somebody who didn't go to the kaver of his father for 10 years after his istalkus shouldn't go anymore. And there's another shitta that it's 7 years. And it's then the shai. In the Sikh it says Isa Bachreinim, but it's Tzavas Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. I don't know if that's a stira or not, but so. And then the Rebbe says, but how could it be? Kalev went lishtateach al kivrei avis, and he had never been. The answer is that it was he Pasha wasn't able to. That other people give an answer that he Pasha wasn't able to go, and that's why he was able to go later. And the Rebbe also spoke about this in Tafshin Yud Aleph, which was 7 years. So 7 years and 10 years from the Rebbe's father's istalkus, he brought this up. So the chiluk is whether it's ba'inus or baratzin. And one last thing. The Rebbe started mentioning in the Michtavim HaKlalim, just another interesting fact I learned today. In every Michtav Klali, the Rebbe mentions each of the Rabbeim, starting from Tafshin Lamed Aleph. Tafshin Lamed Aleph is when the Rebbe's father's Torah came out, and he also mentions his father every single time. And the same thing is from Tafshin Lamed Aleph and on, in every Basi Lagani, from when his father's Torah first came out, the Rebbe mentions also his father. And in a Michtav, in Tafshin Chai, the Rebbe writes, before his father, the title, Chvei Kedushas Amur. So I'm sure that the Farbrengen that we're having now, and all of the learning from the Torah of the Rebbe's father, and all of the sharing the different stories, and learning about the life of the Rebbe's father, and what he meant and means to the Rebbe, and to all of us, is certainly Geirim, a lot of Nachas Ruach to the Rebbe. Yahrtzeit that we should continue to be Geirim, more and more Nachas Ruach to the Rebbe, and to be reunited with the Rebbe, the Gashmias, take off a miyad mamish. L'chaim.
Shekayach Rebbe Shmotkin. I think it's appropriate to sing the Nigunim that the Rebbe is Mechaviv, that the Rebbe's father is Mechaviv, and by extension, the Rebbe's Nigunim and the Rebbe's father's Nigunim. Ah, yeah, 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 hey, yeah, 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 hey. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Ah, yeah, 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 ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, ya da ya da ya da hey ya ya hey ya 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 ha ya 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 ha ha ya da ya da ya ya da ya da ya da ya da Chaim. So we know that one of the other heroes of the Rebbe, for Chof Av, Lenadev, to give tzedakah, and the Rebbe would mention there's various kronis, various funds that are special for certain days of the year, and there's the Harav Levi Yitzchak, which the Rebbe would mention by the Farbrengen to give to on the day of Chof Av. So it's important for us to participate in that Keren. Everyone knows about the Keren, but we might not be familiar with what the Rebbe said when he started the Keren. So there's two points. First of all, what is the Keren? So the Rebbe said that it's a long sikha, but the Rebbe said that there's various meistis chinuch that exist today in the Jewish world. And some of them have limudei chayil and they have limudei kodesh. And because there's certain laws, chukei hamadina, the laws of the land require a certain amount of limudei chayil, a certain amount of secular studies, so they also have the limudei chayil. But there are some schools that have the limudei chayil and limudei kodesh equal amounts of times. There are other schools that have mostly limudei kodesh and they have a little limudei chayil, whatever is required by the chukei hamadina. And there's some that don't have limudei kodesh at all. But even the ones that have both, and that's the situation, that they have both limudei chayil and limudei kodesh, so that might be the law, but the law does not say which one is a priority. The law doesn't say that limudei chayil has to have more of an importance than the limudei kodesh. And we see an interesting phenomenon. The Rebbe says that when it comes to the melamdim, those that are responsible for the limudei kodesh, they get their check sometimes, and sometimes they don't. And they can get it. Sometimes they can get their paycheck. A month go by, they won't get it. 2 months go by, and then when they get it, the Rebbe said they get a head check. And then when it's time to cash the head check, they're told to come back and get another head check. But when it comes to the teachers of the limudei chayil, all of a sudden there's no playing around. Because if they're not, and the Rebbe says that the institutions rationalize it, and they say that the teacher of the limudei kodesh is Yirei Shamayim, and he's doing it for the cause, so to speak. So he's going to do it no matter what, because you have to be mechanech talmidim, not talmidis. But the teacher, if he doesn't get paid, the teacher is going to just go and find another job. So therefore, it's very important to pay the teacher. And not only that, usually the teachers of secular studies get paid either half or double the amounts of the malamdim. And the Rebbe said that he's starting this. It was in Tafshin Chav Daled, which was 20 years from the Hilula of the Rebbe's father. And the Rebbe said he's starting a Keren, and that the purpose of this Keren is that anybody can come in, a Malamed can take a head check that he received from a Meisit Chinuch, and he can take this head check and bring it to this Keren, and he can cash the check. And another purpose of the Keren should be that institutions, even if they're learning equal amount of limudei chayil and limudei kodesh, but any institution that's willing to change their focus and put more of an importance on limudei kodesh over limudei chayil can also take interest-free loans, take a gmach from this Keren, the Harav Levi Yitzchak. And there's one other point which is very fascinating story, which the Rebbe says, what is the story of how this fund began, how this Keren began. And this actually was printed a number of months ago in the Adar magazine. We had the story that there was a woman, which at the time was the woman was anonymous, and the Rebbe said that this Rebbe is the Yahrtzeit-Hilula. The Rebbe used that lashon, that she wanted to remain anonymous, and I'm not sure if it was she that worked in a school, or her husband was a malamed in a school, or maybe both of them, and they were owed a lot of money in back pay from whichever institution they were working for. A few years. somehow the family survived, and one day they received a check, or she received a check for $5,000, which was all of the back pay that she was owed. So check this up, that $5,000 in, this is Chof Av, so 1964, $5,000 was actually worth over $40,000. So she took this $5,000 that she got, and she wrote to the Rebbe, and she said that we survived without it all these years. So this $5,000 we don't need. I'm giving it to the Rebbe to do what he wants with it. And the Rebbe said this woman is a woman that has many children, and she's an American, and her husband's an American, and they didn't grow up with the Mesiris Nefesh from Medina Hahi, and they're not familiar with all of this. Nevertheless, she didn't take a portion for herself, or half for herself, and give some of it to tzedakah. She took the $5,000 and gave that amount to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, I'm starting the keren with this, which is $5,000, but $40,000 in today's standards. I'm taking this seed money and starting the keren. And everyone should be menadiv to the keren. What that $5,000 meant to this woman with so many kids. And the Rebbe said it's a family that I'm sure doesn't have a savings account. Whatever the $5,000 meant to that woman with so many kids, that every person should take that equivalent, the amount of money, the equivalent, that word, that value, and donate it to the keren. So it's something that's supposed to be done on the Yahrtzeit-Hilula, and we can still do it if you did not do it yet. And it can be done online. You can donate the Harav Levi Yitzchak at magbis.org. It's magbis, magbis.org. And that's a hira from the Rebbe, Lilmid by Svadus, and also to give tzedakah by the Farbrengen. So you can mekayim the Rebbe's hira to give the Harav Levi Yitzchak, and it can be done at magbis.org. Many people are familiar with Chof Av and associate it with the camps. And I guess it started that by Avram Shem Tov had this idea to make the Yahrtzeit-Hilula, and the Rebbe was mechav of the Yahrtzeit-Hilula, which takes place every year in Gan Yisroel in Parksville, New York. And the Rebbe hat sich ausgedrückt that this is a way that he's mechav his father. And the Gan Yisroel of that camp, Gan Yisroel, Parksville, and other camps over the years made special effort to bring the entire camp and all of the children to the Rebbe for Chof Av. So many people's childhood memories of the Chof Av by the Rebbe was from the camp, coming to the Farbrengen, or later there's a rally and special sichos that the Rebbe said for the camp specifically. So we have with us Chof Av Shliach, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Kantor, the head Shliach of Thailand, who is also zeichet to be a head counselor in I think Tafshin Nun and Tafshin Nun Aleph, when the head council of Gan Yisroel in New York, when they came to the Rebbe. So we'd like to ask Rabbi Yosef Chaim Kantor to share with us Mamshach Zan de Farbrengen.
Chaim, we all know the concept of ani mispalel al da ze atinik. That Tzemach Tzedek brings in Sheresh Mitzvah Tefillah, the Mekubal who wrote, after all the inyanim of Kabbalah and Kavanas Hatfillah, nonetheless, he said, when I daven like a child davens. When a child davens, he davens to the Eibishter, doesn't know all the Kavanas, exactly which shemus, which names, and which spheres, and so on. He davens the Eibishter, and he davens to the Eibishter, and there's a certain simplicity in the way a child takes things, the way he turns to the Eibishter. And this big Mekubal wrote that when he davens, he also davens with a simplicity post Kavanas, in other words, above all the Kavanas, push it with the simplicity of a child. So coming to the Rebbe on Chof Av with children, the whole camp of children, it's brings out a certain inyan of al da ze atinik. What were the children really understanding, and by extension, those that were accompanying the children, the staff, what were they really understanding about the experience? So the first year, Tafshin Nun, I was a head counselor in Gan Yisroel, and we came, it was Shabbos, Chof Av was Shabbos. So Bechlal, the whole tzir of bringing a whole camp into Crown Heights and sleeping on the floor of Olitera and being very militant. I'm not sure why we were so nervous then. And Chas v'shalom, no parent should walk into Olitera to Chas v'shalom see their kid. When you're 20, some things seem very, very, very important. Like the whole Seder Shtalsh is going to break down. If Chas v'shalom, a mother squeezes in a granola bar to her kid, Erev Shabbos, it's going to be mamish disaster. But whatever, that's the whole misoviv. But then all the children going and davening with the Rebbe by the tefillas and trying to make sure that, of course, they're quiet and they say the appropriate amens and so on. And then standing by the Rebbe's Farbrengen, Shabbos afternoon. So we were standing all on the bleachers. And I'll be honest, too much of the Farbrengen I don't remember hearing. First of all, it was the bleachers. Second of all, there was a whole camp of kids. And but I do remember very vividly that the Rebbe spoke to the children. And the Rebbe asked the children to say L'chaim. And then the Rebbe encouraged the singing to the children. And when the Rebbe lifted his hands to the children and those that accompanied the children, those that were part of the children, the staff, that it pashtuf gehem. It was like going on a, I remember feeling like I was on a cloud. Jumping begashmis, of course, when the Rebbe was ma'eded with his hands, he jumped begashmis. But more than jumping begashmis, Beruchnis, the whole place was like Hananane Shmaya. It was floating. Unbelievable. And the children understood one thing. What did the children know? Children knew that it's Chof Av, it's a day where the Rebbe has Yahrtzeit, and one day where the Rebbe has Yahrtzeit, you have to be with the Rebbe. It's like a father, and it's a special day for him, it's an emotional day for him, it's a touching day for him, it's a holy day for him, whatever it is. And all the Asias is not so negeya. Al da za tinek, a child understands. The kid comes, he knows it's Chof Av. Darf him nicht erzählen, kein größer Lomdes. You don't have to explain to him big things and big hergeshim. He understands. The Rebbe has a special day. It gives nachas to the Rebbe to see that he has children that are being mamshech in his derech, that are coming to be here together with him, and v'chlal the chavivus of the Rebbe to children. Gan Yisroel, the Rebbe had a chavivus to the Rebbe, went 2 times to visit Gan Yisroel. So the whole tzir didn't need much explanation. You start being masbir, why to come chava, why bepashtus. The second year, Tafshin Nun Aleph, I'll be very, very, very honest. Painfully honest. Embarrassedly honest. I don't have, I remember Tisha B'Av. I remember Tisha B'Av because Tisha B'Av shechol b'Shabbos, Tafshin Nun Aleph. I remember the big simcha by Shalosh Shudis. The Rebbe spoke to Yemot about the simcha and the Shabbos. There's no ein etzav bo and so on and so forth. And we were singing Hislavos Gedela Tisha B'Av shechol b'Shabbos marbim b'simcha. And it was so obviously if Tisha B'Av was chol b'Shabbos, so then Chof Av was the same kvias like now. This we also had Tisha B'Av. So I remember when Chof Av was. There wasn't a Farbrengen during the week. It was Tafshin Nun Aleph. It was after. So we came in. I'm sure there are people that know this and remember it. I didn't stammer from Mincha, and the Rebbe gave dollars l'chayra. And the only thing I remember is standing on the back of the benches of 770 trying to get all the kids to the bus. The big thing when you're at counselor is loading the buses and trying to make sure that you have every single kid. It's not kunst to load the buses and to leave a couple of kids here, a couple of kids there. That's fanem the ganze kop. There's the counselors and the dust, and they have to have everyone say that. Did you count all your kids? Did you think? So a big who a makif misoviv. So, but I do remember. Almost a month later, Yud Zayin Elul was the end of camp, and we came at the end of camp. Camp came in Tafshin Nun when camp came back. There wasn't a sicha. Camp Amunah came back at a different time, and there was a rally then. But when Gan Yisroel came back, there wasn't a rally. Tafshin Nun Aleph, I think the last day of camp was the same. Machne Amuna and Gan Yisroel was the same day. And there was a rally, and the Rebbe spoke. And then the Rebbe said he's going to give all the children 3 dimes. So the Seder was that the head staff, that the directors of the camp, Rabbi Shemta, Rabbi Futafas, and then the head counselors, each one would get dimes from the Rebbe to divide to the kids. And then at the time was 3 head counselors, Yosef Yitzchak, myself, and David Schmutz. And we went by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, we gave then, all the children had written notes, I think Achlatas Tevis or whatever it was, had written letters to the Rebbe. We gave, Yossi Chadakov gave the album of notes to the Rebbe. The Rebbe asked, it was for him, he took it. And then the Rebbe put packets of dimes in Yossi's hands. And then he put a few packets of dimes, was about to put it in my hands. He was still looking at Yossi, and he said, Geben jederen 3, let's give each child 3. And then the Rebbe said, Uzen nemen for sich euch. Make sure to take for yourself also. And phew, a huge smile. 3 smiles. One to Yossi, one to me, and then one to David Sputz. In the split second, in the nanosecond that the Rebbe is looking at you and giving a smile, and you see the Rebbe smiling at the first head counselor went by, and then and I noticed that the Rebbe's smile stopped. Then it started again, it stopped, and it started again. 3 separate smiles. But the Nikuda zen nemen for sich euch. So, I guess I messed up on the second Chof Av. I don't know. I don't know what I took. The first one, Tafshin Nun, very vividly is with me. Tafshin Nun Aleph, the Rebbe told me a month later, Dav zen nemen for sich euch. You have to be busy with the kids, that's true, but you gotta also be there. You got to also be part of it, not just... okay. So, I just want to say something very simple. Al daze atinik. This is what I'm saying. That people... It's important to learn about the mahus of the day, and obviously the Rebbe wants us to know about his father and about the day and about the Mesiras Nefesh. And there's a very, very interesting, in Tafshin Chav Tes, which was 25 years from Chof Av, in the second Sikha, the Rebbe speaks there about one of the Yesedis of Yiddishkeit is that even though the neshama already was nostalgic from the guf, and therefore l'cheira, what can you do possibly to impact the neshama? It's not here anymore. One of the Yesedis of Emunah is, of Das Yisrael, the Rebbe says, is that there's no pirud, there's no hefsek between the neshama and the guf, the neshama the way it is up there, and by doing maisim here in this world, that has an effect on the neshama. The Rebbe uses this lashon, and this is the answer to divas fragen. Was kemen ton b'shas mevil I don't know what lashon gedenken or azeden or the alte zede. How do you remember azeda? This is the lashon of the Rebbe uses azeda, the alte zede. What are you going to do to be able to impact them? I'm not going to learn any pshatlach and what I think, but just an interesting lashon. At that, the way to do it is by doing what they can't do now here. So you have a double responsibility. Side to do what you have to do, and also to make up for what that neshama can't do here. You also have to do. So we Chassidim is aldas even for those simple ones that don't understand all the details of yet of what the day is. Okay, we can get more educated. Today there's all the links. There's so much ribuy links that it's sometimes overwhelming. But Adavar Poshet, it's a Chof Av, and the Rebbe has Yahrtzeit for his father. So Mamela, a Chassid wants to be, even in a very simplistic way, a Chassid wants to be by the Rebbe, and that's the Nekuda. And I'm going to share a personal story. First of all, I had a schus, and every year I realized more the schus, that in Tafshin Nun Aleph, we were a group, at the time it was Perestroika, Glasnost, whatever they called it, right after Tishrei, Tafshin Nun Aleph, the biggest group of Bochurim that ever went to Russia went to Russia. How big was the group? 7 zuges, 7 pairs of Bochurim. We went by the Rebbe then, it was right after Tishrei. It was 14 Bochurim, and all the other Bochurim, except for myself and my chaver, Yossi Bilsovsky, we went to Berdichev. All the other Bochurim had yeshivas in their cities. It was Kharkov and Peterburg and Moscow and Kherson, I think. But by us, there was in Berdichev, there wasn't yeshivas. Berdichev was mainly Alti Yidden. So there came a need. We went to Dnepropetrovsk for a kinnis ashluchim of all the Tmimim. And by that kinnis, there became an opportunity to have a kinnis of the Yidden in Almatah for the first time since World War II. Permission was granted that in Almatah they could rent a theater or a big hall and make an official gathering of all the Yidden of Almatah. And they needed somebody to go and fear on. Of course, we didn't speak really too much Russian. A little bit we spoke. But they gave an interpreter. That was the Seder then. The American, the Shluchim would speak with an interpreter. And all the other Bochurim had yeshiva. So myself and Yossi Bilsovsky, we had then the schus to go to Almatah. We flew to Tashkent. And then from Tashkent, we flew to Almatah. And Nochem Tamarin, I think, was there, and he picked us up, and they arranged to use the banya, the mikveh, and we went to Harav Levi Yitzchok's. I don't remember if there's an Ohel there already. Could be. I don't remember what year it was. And then we went and did a kinnus for all the Yidden. The time was the first kinnus in Almatah. So that's definitely a big schus. I'm wondering. Again, this was beginning. This was Stamach Kislev or Tevis. Tovshin and Aleph, I would be interested who wrote then the Duch. Maybe I'll ask, look into it and see if there was any Siachis, because it was a big thing that the first kinnis. And so, l'chaim to you all, the day and the opportunity to come together on this day. It will definitely be pale on us to be mechazek our iskashus. Say if we understood why we came fully, say if we came al daza atinik, and we know that the one thing we have today that keeps us going and that will bring the curtain down on the golus and bring the geula is the chizek iskashus, be ilone dechaya the iskashus to the Rebbe and to everything that's dear to the Rebbe, and l'chaim should be zeicha to no more Yahrtzeits, and even Hilulas should be only in ha'efen of Nagolidik ha'efen, which should be taken from Yad Mamish. L'chaim.
I'd like that we'll sing the Nigunim in a second. With this, we conclude the formal part of the Farbrengen. And thank you very much, Rabbi Shmotkin and Rabbi Kantor. It was words that will give us fuel to bring down the day pale. And I just want to mention that Chof Av, also Rabbi Kantor and Rabbi Shmotkin, will be Farbrengen in a few minutes, together with the group of other shluchim that are here. And I just want to mention that there is a Rabbi Kantor mentioned links. There's an important link where you can see many resources for Chof Av and videos and kevtzim and articles. And this can be seen on vechom.org/Chof Av. So that's orvechom.org, orvechom.org/Chof Av. And obviously, remember to give to the Camp Gan Levi Yitzchok at magbis.org. And I would like to thank the team of Chabad.org, Rabbi Zalman Shmotkin and Rabbi Moshe Bergoff and Rabbi Matel Sudak. And also, one other public service announcement is that those that want to bus to Crown Heights, there'll be a bus leaving at 10:30. And Rabbi Shmotkin wants to add something.
It really bothers me when a mistake is made and it's not corrected. So David Dubov apparently is watching from Almatah, and he corrected a story the way I told it, So I just want to, no, seriously, I want to get it right because it's an important story. So the Maisa with the Rebbe, with the gift that the Rebbe Rashab had sent, so the Rebbe's father answered the Bochurim, Ich hab für sie a große Matane und Eber wird sein still, weil ich euch weisen. So of course they went, okay, what's the Matana back to the Rebbe Rashab? And he took them very quietly to a room that was locked, that was closed, and he let them look in through the keyhole, and they saw a young Bochur learning with a bunch of Seforim piled up, and then he finished and he said to them, Das is mein Matana.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, while we're on that, if we're already adding things, so I'm saying a disclaimer, I'm not 100% sure about this, so someone in the crowd, or Rabbi Dubav, please verify, but Rabbi Shmotkin mentioned that Rabbi Dubav and the others saw the Rebbe learning Likutei Torah with his father, and they asked, "Is he learn what's going on?" And the Rebbe Chazer, what it's being said. So I think I need someone to correct me exactly because I'm saying this from memory. I don't have this fresh, but I'm pretty sure that the Rebbe said maybe it was more than once that there was such a concept, either in Minnig or there was such a thing by Chassidim that they would learn with their children under Bar Mitzvah Likutei Torah. That there was such a concept, such a thing existed. So the story of Rebbe Dubav kind of figures out what the Rebbe is, it makes us understand what the Rebbe is referring to.